Kicking off this week's pregame show with Joey Dwyer from right here at VandySports.com. Joey, it's been a little bit since one of these pregame discussions, although we're still about a week out from Vanderbilt and Georgia Tech. Joey, first off, they got it right. I know you put a story out detailing some of Clark Lee's comments in regards to his respect for Brent Key and where these two schools are at in their builds. You'd venture to say Georgia Tech's a little bit ahead of Vanderbilt in their build, but similar programs, two great cities that are drivable for the fan bases, two great academic institutions. I mean, I don't think you could have drew up a better Birmingham Bowl for the Magic City.
Yeah, I think it's a tougher matchup for Vanderbilt than I maybe anticipated them getting in the bowl draw, but I think it's a lot more interesting of a matchup than maybe I'd considered as well. I think, like you said, two very similar programs in terms of the way they're trying to build it, kind of the scheming they try to do, but also two very similar institutions and two schools that are pretty geographically similar in terms of their distance from Birmingham. So I do think the Birmingham Bowl got it right, and Vanderbilt was fortunate to get that kind of draw with the record that it had. I thought you could have seen it play in bowl on like December 20th, December 21st against a mid-major, and I think that would have been pretty disheartening for that program. But now it feels like they've really got something to build towards, and a win in the Birmingham Bowl would really, really mean something. And I think ending the season 7-6 versus 6-6 is a huge thing. And if you don't think bowl games matter, I think you look at that and look at the way that this team wants to finish and say, man, this could be Diego Pavia's last game. It could be CJ Taylor. Well, it will be CJ Taylor and DeRicky Wright's last game. There's a lot on the line for Vanderbilt. Maybe it's not college football playoff or things we were talking about mid-year that they were talking about, but I think it is something that is valuable, and I think it's good to see a matchup that people are genuinely interested in rather than it being a bowl game on December 20th against a team from a conference that's nowhere comparable to the SEC. This is a game that has real parallels between the programs, and it's really going to be a good game, I would imagine, Billy.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be really fun to watch Diego Pavia versus Haynes King. We'll get into that matchup, but what concerns you here is where I go next, Joey. Obviously, Georgia Tech will be without their best receiver, Eric Singleton. One of their safeties, Tay Seymour, entered the portal, and I think both those guys are headed to Auburn. I think Seymour committed. I know Singleton has a crystal ball to Auburn, so unfortunate for the Yellow Jackets. They lose those guys, but they also will be without their left tackle, Corey Robinson. But even with all those guys out, Joe, you still have Haynes King. You still have Jamal Haynes, who's a really good running back. You still got a solid offensive line there. I mean, Brent Key was an offensive lineman there at Georgia Tech. They're gonna put out a good offensive line product in this Birmingham Bowl, and a solid defense. They fly around. So what concerns you, even with some of those guys out for the Yellow Jackets?
I think it's just the general mentality of Georgia Tech for me. If I'm Vanderbilt, that I'm worried about. Georgia Tech is 2-1 against top 10 teams that it's played this year. This isn't a game of that magnitude, but it's proven it can get up for big games and win against teams that it probably shouldn't be favored against. And even the game it lost was Georgia. It was a 2-point game. And those are all better teams than Vanderbilt by a long shot. I guess not Florida State, but at the time they were viewed as a better team than Vanderbilt by a long shot. But I just think their attitude and the way that Haynes King leads them, Diego Pavia even compared them yesterday, I think that's a thing to watch. I also think that with Haynes King coming back, their offense might be a little bit more dynamics than Vanderbilt. I do wonder about them not having their leading target, right? That's a problem, but Vanderbilt's also been really stagnant offensively lately, and I wonder if Georgia Tech has a more dynamic offense that can make Vanderbilt pay for some things. I think the matchup that I look at that could really help Vanderbilt is the tight ends versus the linebackers. I think Eli Stowers and Cole Spence could really have a good day. Georgia Tech linebackers have really given up some yards in coverage to tight ends throughout the year. And I think that's a problem that maybe Vanderbilt could exploit a little bit, but also you can scheme around it. So I don't know, Billy, I think they're a little more dynamic, and I don't think they shy away from the big stage. And this isn't the biggest stage on the planet, but it's a good one. And I think one that Vanderbilt is going to be up for as well. But I think Georgia Tech is probably a team that is a little bit more talented, but I wonder if they're a little hampered by the guys that opted out as well.
Well, and one of them that is not opting out is Haynes King, and that there was a little bit of a question there. I think coming into this game, will Haynes King play in the Birmingham Bowl? Will he return to Georgia Tech next year? There was some buzz about that, and he quickly denied those in a press conference a few days ago and said he'll be back and he's playing in the Birmingham Bowl. There's been no thought about leaving. He's not 100%, and he is being affected with his throwing shoulder there due to an injury. So, and Pavia, we talked to Pavia. He said he'll be close to 100% in this game, which is remarkable. The healthiest he'll be since that Virginia Tech game. So, Joey, the Haynes King Diego Pavia show is going to be really fun. But within that matchup, they're similar players, but offensively, does Tech prove to be a little too much? Because man, their offensive coordinator is phenomenal. So is Vandy's. So this is the OC battle plus the quarterback battle with about a month to prepare for this game. I can't wait.
Yeah. Before we get into the quarterbacks, I think Tim Beck he's got a lot to prove this weekend, or not this weekend, whatever this show airs.
A week out. Yeah.
A week out. Vanderbilt really has a lot that it has to adjust to that teams have kind of picked up on. I think the option game has really been foiled by a lot of SEC teams, and I think Georgia Tech will probably try to do the same thing. Can Tim Beck adjust and put his guys in position to where it's not like we had talked about winning your one-on-one matchup every time? Can you scheme around that a little bit and allow guys to get open based off of your play call? I think that's a big thing that he did early in the year, and you didn't necessarily see it down the stretch. As for the quarterbacks, I think Pavia is probably a bit healthier than King, which I wasn't necessarily expecting to say. I thought that was a really interesting remark from Pavia in his presser that he was as healthy as he's been since Virginia Tech. That was a real positive coming out of it, and I guess that's what happens when you have a month to prepare. But I think Haynes King also is getting there a little bit, though. Georgia was the first game where he was really able to throw, I guess, at a higher level than he had been throughout the year. He was the only quarterback that really played in that Georgia game and really threw, which I thought was significant. So I'd expect him to be a little bit more healthy than he has been throughout the year, at least more capable of running the offense fully. But, man, it is a good matchup. Two spunky quarterbacks that have a lot of edge to them, have a chip on their shoulder, like Diego Pavia said. And Pavia even expressed his respect for Haynes King in only a way that Diego Pavia could do at that presser. So good matchup of two guys who I think really have transformed their respective programs. And I think Haynes King coming back for next year is a big thing for Georgia Tech. And Vanderbilt would really benefit if Diego Pavia had the same result. So I think these are two guys that, again, transform their programs, and a win for each of them would be really significant in the bowl.
Clark Lee in this bowl game has talked a lot about just how much of a legacy that this game is for this team, and how this is a legacy team. I mean, 10th bowl game for this program, which is remarkable. And you get to that 10 number, that's pretty big for this program. What would a win mean for this program, Joey? I tried to get at that with Pavia. He said it'd mean everything. Not only are they getting the Birmingham Bowl trophy, the Cowbell trophy, this would be big for portal season recruiting. I don't think you have to have it. They could still lose this game and sign the same guys, but who knows? Maybe there's a portal player out there or a high school recruit looking for Vanderbilt to prove that they can go beat Georgia Tech in this game. And I think the way the fans could travel down there, I think there's a lot of impact within this game that, and especially if you add on to it that they win, it'd be massive.
I think a lot of it's about momentum, right? They've ended the season on a 3-game losing streak. We talked all year about this being one of the best Vanderbilt football teams in recent memory. If one of the best Vanderbilt football teams in recent memory ends their team with a losing record, I think that's really demoralizing for Clark Lee and his program. I don't know that they'll view it that way, but I think just from the outside looking in, it's like, man, you beat number 1 Alabama, you went on the road at Auburn, and you still had a losing record. I think this is a huge, like Clark Lee said, I think you said it perfectly. It's a legacy game for this team. Are you 7-6 or are you 6-7? Are you the first team to have a winning record since 2013, or are you kind of just like all the other teams with some great moments mixed in? Are you a team that's viewed as a team that kind of had a flash in the pan run, or are you a legitimately good team that has really made more marks within this program than you thought they would? I think a losing record would be really demoralizing for them, and a winning record would just be huge for them. It's just not even in terms of just recruiting, but just in terms of perception as to how this program is viewed and the legitimacy of it. I think Clark Lee he's engineered a massive turnaround within this program, and that's going to be minimized nationally. And I think even locally, in some senses, if they can't end it with a winning record, this is a huge, huge game for them. And it's not, like you said, it's not a have to have it game. I still think they can have a good year next year. And perception isn't necessarily everything, although some people will tell you that. I think this is a big one, though, just in terms of perception and kind of seeing what the blueprint looks like and how the blueprint is paid off. There's a lot less to sell if you only win 6 games and have 7 losses at the end of the year. 7-6 would be a huge step for this program.
It would. I mean, it'd be absolutely massive if Vanderbilt can get this win. Again, about a week out from Vanderbilt and Georgia Tech, December 27th, couple of days after Christmas, 2:30 kickoff on ESPN. That's Joey Dwyer. Joey, thanks for checking in with us. Merry Christmas and happy holidays.
Yeah, Merry Christmas. Hopefully this camera angle is eradicated after the show once the new tripod comes in.
All right, wrapping up this week's pregame show with Chad Bishop, Georgia Tech beat writer from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And Chad, you're very familiar with Vanderbilt as well. Being what was the title there at Vanderbilt?
Yeah, I was just man, I don't even know my title, but I was in the communications office. Worked with the men's and women's golf team and the bowling team as an SID, a sports information director. But then it was also sort of an in-house beat writer for the folks, and covered all the games and wrote a lot of feature stories, and got to know all the coaches and players really well. So yeah, we got the Bishop Bowl now. Who would have thunk that not only would the Commodores make a bowl game, but they'd play Georgia Tech, the team that I now cover.
Yeah, I want to get to just some of your personal background here. It's got to be really cool for you. It's got to be, an experience where, okay, Vanderbilt, obviously in football was not at the same spot they were, and they've been building to this point, and it's somewhat similar with Georgia Tech in the build with Brent Key. I'd probably say they're a year maybe ahead of Vanderbilt and maybe even more. But man, it's got to be cool for you personally. Obviously, with all the time you spent at Vanderbilt and now being in Atlanta covering Georgia Tech.
Yeah, it's awesome. I was in Birmingham, a little bit ago. They had a pre-bowl press conference, and was able to see Clark Lee and give him a hug, and Michael Scholl and Molly Hart, who work close with Clark Lee, and I can't wait for the bowl game to see all sorts of people on that staff, and then all sorts of people, from McGugan, RIP, who worked in that office, and, the video team and social team and photography team and, behind the scenes folks, and, even, Candace Lee, to be able to, dap it up with her and see her again. So yeah, it's really awesome. I mean, I think the roster, I looked at the roster, there's not too many kids left in this transfer portal era that maybe I would know or who would even know who I am. So that actually kind of makes it easier, right? Like, it's not, there's not a lot of players that I know or will necessarily be cheering for on either side of the ball. But it's great, man. I'm super excited for Clark Lee to, I was there the day his plane landed from South Bend at the Bowling Green International Airport and watched him get off that plane. And so it's cool to see him get to a bowl game to lead his alma mater there. Like Brent Key, man, he said it, like, these guys who coach their alma maters, it means a little bit more to them. There's a little bit more passion, a little bit more heart into these programs when you played football for that team you're coaching. So it's pretty awesome to see him be able to do this, and take this step in the building of this program.
I'm glad you mentioned the two head coaches, 2 alums who love their schools, 2 great academic institutions, 2 great cities, and it's a short trip for both these fan bases. Chad, I couldn't think of a better, maybe not matchup. This is going to be a tough matchup for Vanderbilt, but for both these teams, I don't see why both these coaches, both these schools, and both these fan bases shouldn't be thrilled to get down to Birmingham and watch this matchup.
Yeah, I mean, it's awesome. A couple hour drive, for both fan bases, if you're, basing that out of Nashville and Atlanta. And I'm sure there's plenty of Vanderbilt alums in Birmingham and plenty of Georgia Tech alums in Birmingham as well, which will bring folks out. Think if this game was being played in San Diego, right, or Jacksonville, I mean, there would be a lot of people there, to be honest, right? And this thing is probably going to trend toward I don't know if it'll be a sold out game, but there probably should be, right? Like, 30,000 fans there. It's going to be a great atmosphere. Really sort of reminiscent to Georgia Tech's opener over in Ireland, believe it or not. I mean, that place was packed out, and there was a huge interest in that game. There were a lot of Florida State fans, a lot of Georgia Tech fans. I think this will be similar, that there'll be a lot of fans from both fan bases to fill that place up. And it's again really cool for both of these coaches. You forgot that both are bald as well, so they got that going for them. And guys who are gritty and tough and played football in an era where it was a little bit different, but have adjusted to lead their programs back to postseason play. And so, yeah, I think they got a ton of respect for each other, and it's going to be cool to see them square off on the field.
Yeah, for people that don't know, these two teams were in the same conference for almost 50 years in the Southern Intercollegiate Athletic Association, as it was called in the early 1900s, and then 1922 to 1932, the Southern Conference, and then the SEC for about 30 years. And a cowbell has been awarded to the winning team since 1924. Chad, I know you've written about this. I know you've talked about it, and I've heard this cowbell is in Georgia Tech's possession and will be in Birmingham. Tell people about this, and I think it's a really cool touch to this rivalry. I think, I mean, it makes you want these teams to play every year, and maybe that's in the cards. But tell people who don't know about this cowbell a little bit more.
Yeah, it's a great story unearthed by Andy Demetra, who's the play-by-play radio voice of Georgia Tech football and basketball and some other sports. And it was back in the 1920s. I think there was just a fan who brought a cowbell to the game and decided to give it to the winning team back then. It just sort of became an unofficial tradition of the rivalry, where he came to the Georgia Tech Vanderbilt matchup every single time they played, and he would hand the cowbell off to whoever won. And it's the last time Georgia Tech had won was pre-2016, and they went looking for that cowbell, and sure enough, it was in a filing cabinet somewhere next to some printer ink or some printer toner, and they brought it to the 16 game. And there's a picture of Paul Johnson waving the thing after the win. Confirmed recently that Georgia Tech plans to bring it to the Birmingham Bowl, and assuming whoever wins the game will get to take that thing home. So it could be in Vanderbilt's new trophy case, or it could be in Georgia Tech's new trophy case after December 27th. But pretty kind of a fun thing that you would only get in college football, right? Like the NFL teams aren't going to play for a silly cowbell, but you're darn right, some college teams are going to do that.
Absolutely. That's a really, really good touch to this game. Let's talk about Brent Key and his build up to this point. We just mentioned that there are some similarities between how Brent Key has had to build Georgia Tech and how Clark Lee has tried to build Vanderbilt. Tell me about how this has happened, because, man, I mean, obviously it probably starts with getting Haynes King, but it also, you can't talk about Georgia Tech's success without talking about Buster Faulkner and his impact on this program. So what all has gone into this build up to this point? And obviously you haven't been, this is only your second year covering the program, but I know you followed that as well prior to covering Georgia Tech. So what can you say about the build up to this point and how they've gotten here?
Yeah, and for folks who don't know, before Brent Key, Georgia Tech had made the transition from the option offense and Paul Johnson to Jeff Collins, who was formerly a coach at Temple. And Jeff Collins had the task of coming in and trying to be the guy after the guy and switching out the roster from option kids on offense and going to more of a pro style system, and things just didn't work out. I mean, there was a lot of bravado around his hire, and he was pretty confident in what he was doing, and the team was just terrible. They were not a good football team. And Brent Key took over on an interim basis in 2022 and went 4-4 in the last 8 games of 2022, which administration saw was enough to make him the full-time guy. So, he put his hands in the dirt and went to work right away and trying to rebuild this roster and reshape this roster. And I think you bring up a good point. Yeah, it wasn't only bringing Haynes King into the mix at quarterback, but it was retaining Chris Winkie as the quarterback's coach, hiring Buster Faulkner to run the offense. This past offseason, he made a change at defensive coordinator and brought in Tyler Santucci, and then Jess Simpson to coach the defensive front. He has not been afraid to continually make changes on his staff, and on his roster. I mean, I think the 2023 team was good, but I think Brent Key knew in the back of his mind to take that next step, they had to bulk up the trenches, and they've done that, especially on the defensive front within the transfer portal. He's going to have good offensive line play because Brent Key is a former offensive lineman himself. So they've taken steps. I mean, they're not close by any means. He's 7-6 last year, 7-5 this year. They finished in the top 5 of the ACC both seasons, and a few plays away this year from maybe being a 9-3 football team. But I think they've still got a ways to go from competing for a conference championship. That being said, they're clearly trending in the right direction. The kids who play for Brent Key love him. He's a very honest coach, very down to earth, but also very demanding, of his guys, and the guys who sign up to play for him, they really respect that.
Well, more on Haynes King, and you wrote about this for the AJC, saying that Haynes King will play in the Birmingham Bowl and plans to return for next season. I know there was some buzz. There's always buzz now. Could Haynes King, leave next year? Is somebody going to come after him? Well, I mean, this has to be huge news for Georgia Tech. Said I haven't even thought about leaving, and of course that means he's going to play in the Birmingham Bowl. But also, he's banged up. Just like Pavia, everybody's banged up. But he also said, if I can go, I'm going to go. So, what percent would you say Haynes King is at right now? And then, obviously, is there a chance he's at 100% of the Birmingham Bowl, or is that out of the equation?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because injuries in college are a little murky. We never really know the full effect. We know that Haynes King has a hurt throwing shoulder. He hurt it against North Carolina back in October. He missed 2 games and then came back in November. Really turned himself into sort of this old school wishbone offense running quarterback. And a lot of folks, I'm sure, watched that Georgia game where he, laid it all on the line in 8 overtimes. And that was the best game he's had in the second half of the season in terms of getting back to throwing the ball. And I was at practice, a little bit ago and watched Haynes King throw, and he does look way better throwing the ball than he has before that injury in the North Carolina game. But what I think what's curious as to what Georgia Tech has done is they have known that Haynes King can't throw it incredibly well, and they've sort of curtailed their offense to the strength of him running the ball. And they've been able to get away with it, and they've also played backup quarterback Aaron Philo, a true freshman who can really, really throw the ball. So they piece some things together. It looks like Haynes King, like we said, will play in this Birmingham Bowl. Whether he can throw it 10 times, 15 times, 20 times, I don't really know, but that really hasn't been this Georgia Tech's team's strength down the stretch of this season. They've been able to run it pretty consistently and use him in this option look where he's not necessarily pitching the ball, but a lot of read options. He's running it a lot, and they're very effective when they have that thing humming. So I'd be curious to see, which Haynes King we get, if it's the pre-injury Haynes King who can throw it maybe 20 times, or if it's this post-injury Haynes King who's still very effective in running the football.
Well, Haynes King will play, of course, in the Birmingham Bowl, but there are a few departures, a few starters that will not play. Wide receiver Eric Singleton has entered the portal. Tay Seymour, a guy that I know as of late has been starting in the secondary, and then also Corey Robinson, left tackle, starting left tackle there. So, how much do you think those departures will play into Georgia Tech, and how much of a blow, especially a guy like Singleton who was obviously far and away, you would think, their best receiver out wide. So how much do you think that could impact the Yellow Jackets in the bowl game?
Yeah, I won't sugarcoat it. Losing Eric Singleton is big for this Georgia Tech offense. He's their fastest player. He's their home run hitter. Brent Key told us this season, he's been clocked at 22, 23 miles an hour. That's in a game. That's not in practice. The kid can fly. He is definitely one of their best wide receivers. But that being said, we just talked about Haynes King and the way this Georgia Tech team runs the football. So Haynes King and a lot of the other wide receivers haven't been hugely involved in this Georgia Tech offensive attack in recent weeks. They still have Malik Rutherford, who's one of the most reliable, consistent, dependable guys in that Georgia Tech offense, and Chase Lane, who's an elder wide receiver who can make a lot of plays as well. So they'll work around it. I'm sure they're sad to see Eric go. But they got some guys on the come up like Bailey Stockton and Isaiah Canyon who have made some plays down the stretch too. At the left tackle position will be interesting because Corey Robinson was, one of the mainstays on this offensive line, which is really good. His backup, Jordan Brown, also left. So we're sort of down to Ethan McKinney, who had an outstanding freshman season in 2023, but hasn't played a whole lot in 2024. So we would assume he would get the spot there. He's more than capable of doing it, but it just hasn't been in that lineup very consistently this season. And then Tay Seymour in the secondary, he has made some plays and he came on strong at the end of the year. But the way Georgia Tech's defense works is they rotate a lot of guys, both on the defensive front and in the defensive secondary. So I think his absence will be covered up. Rodney Shelley will be there. He announced recently that he's coming back in 2025 as well. Saeed Gibbs. They got some guys in that secondary who can play multiple positions, whether it's safety, nickelback, or corner. So it's a loss in terms of depth, but I don't think it's a guy that's going to really, deplete the defense, so to speak.
All right. How fun is Haynes King and Diego Pavia going to be? We just talked about Haynes King. He's got an injury to his throwing shoulder. Pavia, he could have 3 different injuries by this point right now that he's dealing with, but it helps, obviously. I think it helps that Vanderbilt's not in the Gasparilla Bowl, which is in a few days, actually, when we record this. But now you're playing, a couple days after Christmas. I think that definitely helps Pavia. What are you most looking forward to watching in this matchup? Starting offensively, just the battle, the physical battle that we're going to see. It should be fun.
I think the creativity that both offenses are going to have to sort of come up with. This is sort of like, to kind of go off the rails here, almost like an Army-Navy matchup, right? Where like both teams are almost, very, very similar and carbon copies of one another. So which offensive coordinator and which offense, will sort of come up with some curious, interesting stuff and maybe some trick plays, or, which teams are going to say, we know, what we're going to do, see if you can stop it. So just super excited to see the plays that Haynes King is going to make, super excited to see the plays Diego Pavia is going to make, whether that's with their feet or with their arms or both. I think it's going to be fascinating to sort of see the chess match going in of who can adjust quickest, who can readjust, who can make some plays, and really which offense pulls out some of the stops and maybe some things we haven't seen all season long. I think that could determine really the outcome of this game when it's all said and done.
All right, I'm interested. I got a couple more here. Where can Vanderbilt expose Georgia Tech, whether it's Vanderbilt's defense attacking the offense or Vanderbilt's offense attacking Tech's defense, especially with some guys entering the portal and maybe some weak spots emerging? Where can Vanderbilt where can they expose this Tech team and eventually find ways to beat them?
Well, I'll be curious to see when we just mentioned Diego Pavia, because against Cam Ward, Georgia Tech was outstanding. Cam Ward did not run the football very much at all. He had a great day passing the ball. But then, the following week against North Carolina State, the Wolfpack's quarterback ran all over Georgia Tech. Now, some of that was scrambling. So can Diego Pavia find running room? Can Vanderbilt draw up some things to get Diego Pavia loose, whether that's maybe dropping back in sort of a pass look and then taking off? A lot of defenses obviously struggle against scrambling quarterbacks. And is that sort of the route that Vanderbilt wants to go? Try to maybe throw the ball or at least come out in passing looks, but allow Diego to run and get out there in space. So I think that's number one. And then defensively, Georgia Tech, a lot like Vanderbilt, has not given up a lot of tackles for loss and has not given up, a lot of sacks. So how will this Vanderbilt defense go after this Georgia Tech offense? And if Georgia Tech is going to come out there and try to run the ball, 40 times in this game, can Vanderbilt sell out? And are they strong enough in the secondary to do that? So I think those are 2 keys for me to watch, is how how this Vanderbilt defense approaches this Georgia Tech attack. And it's been perplexing to watch some of these defenses against Georgia Tech and say, this quarterback can't throw, right? Like, why aren't you guys putting 8 and 9 guys in the box? And so I'll be interesting to see the defensive game plan from Vanderbilt's perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I don't think Vanderbilt, and maybe it's the same for Georgia Tech, I don't think Vanderbilt has faced an offense as similar as theirs this season. So I'm really interested, like you said, the chess match between Tim Beck and Buster Faulkner, 2 phenomenal offensive coordinators, by the way, is going to be so fun to watch. All right, before we let you go, give us your pick. How do you feel like this thing is going to go on December 27th there in Birmingham?
Oh man, I'm not trying to cop out here. I swear, like I'm not. But we've just talked about it for like 30 minutes. Like these teams are so even, really. Like that, when bowl games are about matchups, I think the Birmingham Bowl just has to be just super pumped on this one because these teams are so like-minded. And then, you're going to probably have some portal guys in before this game, right? I mean, there are probably some true freshmen playing, some guys who haven't played all year. There's going to be some interesting stuff happen. So I just think because of the even matchup between these two, it's just hard for me to pick a winner. And again, I'm not trying to cop out on that. I just could see it being a game that comes down to the last kick or the last play. It could go to overtime. It's hard for me to see this game going one-sided in one direction or the other. Tech's got 7 wins and Vanderbilt's got 6. And I know the Commodores are on a bit of a 3-game losing streak here. Bowl games are a lot about motivation, right? Like which team is going to want it more. I don't think Georgia Tech's disappointed to be there. I know Vanderbilt is absolutely thrilled to be in a bowl game for the first time in 6 years. So I think it's going to be a highly contested game and a highly competitive game. And for that reason, I think it's going to go right down to the wire. Georgia Tech has a pretty good kicker in Aiden Burr. And I think maybe if I had to, I would give him the slight edge. And so maybe the Commodores win it 24-23. I'm sorry, Georgia Tech.
Okay.
Maybe win. See, now you can't say who I picked because I just messed it up. But yeah, I'll say what's the spread? Like 2 points, right? So
2.5, yeah.
Yeah. So let's go Georgia Tech 24-23 on an Aiden Burr game-winning field goal, ending the season the way Georgia Tech started.
There you have it. Chad bet you might have some Vandy fans in your Twitter mentions here soon.
That's all right. I love Vandy fans. I miss them. I love them. I'm happy. I'm excited to see some of them I've been able to meet over the years.
Absolutely. I think you were the first person I thought of with this matchup, and talked to some people there at Vandy. I'm obviously excited to see this matchup and get to Birmingham. I think it's going to be really fun. Chad, I'll see you there, and thanks for taking some time with me.
Yeah, man. See ya.